Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I feel like standing. Gonna stand the night away. No. So great to see everyone. Bruchim habayim. Welcome. Those of you who are from Emunah, those of you from Isaiah. This is a very special evening every year where we get to spend some time together as one community. It doesn't always happen that communities from different denominations really come together as one. It's one of the unique and precious gifts that we've had for many decades. I want to welcome new colleagues, Rabbi Karen Tomasho, who is new, I've been working on my pronunciation, who is a wonderful new colleague to have here at Temple Isaiah, and welcoming Rabbi Jordi Battis, who's been here, and Cantor Lisa Dube, who's been here for many years. It's great to have all three of you up here. I'm going to give a very short introduction because I want to jump into a few words from the four of us, and then open it up into your questions and have a little bit of a conversation. So the introduction is to say, it is a gift that different movements in Judaism can come together in various ways. And so this evening, we have both a service, the Selihot service, and the opportunity to learn. And so it's a real opportunity for us to share both our differences and our similarities. As we look at American Judaism, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, especially the non-Orthodox Jewish world, we were thinking about what are the trends. And if you've been a little bit of a student of American Jewry and you're looking around, you'll see that there are some challenges, that numbers are diminishing. Reform and conservative synagogues, some of them are struggling, thankfully not ours, but other ones that I've heard of, not ours. And not to say we don't have challenges. In any case, I won't digress. And there are challenges that face the American Jewish community writ large. And it's an opportunity for us to think about what are both the challenges and what are the opportunities, right? How can we deal with the differences that are happening in terms of demographics, and think about, right, what this opens up and what are the new doors that might open up for us. So we have a couple of questions. I think Rabbi Tomasho is going to kick us off with some reflections, and I think we have mics for everyone. And b'vakasha. I didn't do bios, but you guys are all welcome today. Whatever you like about yourselves.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for the hearty welcome. And it isn't just today that you've been so welcoming, so I thank you for that. And by extension, I thank the Temple Emunah community and acknowledge the Temple Isaiah community. We are honored to be together, and I think it's incredibly special. I want to echo your sentiments. And one of the ways in which we thought about this panel was to couch it in those larger terms, which is really meaningful conversation that we're only going to begin today. Another way in which to enter this conversation is a way that I'm going to focus on. We're each going to have our own foci that we prepared to complement one another naturally. And for me, it actually has to do with what are we learning, or what have we learned, and I believe we'll continue to have the responsibility to reflect on when it comes to the pandemic, because the pandemic shifted the world, as we all know it, in many spheres. And so for us to not look at how that shift has impacted formal Jewish life, synagogue Jewish life, would be a loss. And as well, one of the things that's really meaningful to me is something that probably many of our teacher, but certainly mine as well, Dr. Jonathan Sarna, he taught me a few years ago that when people ask him, where are we going? He says, let's analyze today. Because if you really look with a mirror at today, it can help us look toward tomorrow. Not everyone's instinct, perhaps, and so we can discuss that another time. But the reason I say that is because for my next 3 minutes, I am going to reflect on one of the greatest learnings of COVID, I believe, that I think can shape the future of synagogue life. So in order to introduce what that is to me, in January of 2021, which if you do the math would not even be a year from the beginning of the pandemic as we know it in the US, Rabbi Joshua Davidson, who's a Reform rabbi at Congregation Emmanuel in New York City, he did an incredibly interesting series of Zoom conversations with his congregation, very large congregation. And after all of these conversations, he put together some learnings. What was the conversation? Not what you might expect, which is, how should we think about Jewish life in the next iteration of it, maybe post-COVID eventually, but rather, and I will quote his question to his community in January of 2021, he said, how have these last, in that case, 10 months, now we could say 3 years, shaped your Jewish identity and your Jewish experience? And to that, he actually heard so many answers with overlapping themes that he created and published, if you'd like to read this on your own time, a list in the Jewish Week, New York Jewish Week, and that was a little bit after that in 2021. And I'm going to read very briefly a few of the things that he believes that he learned, and then I'm going to hold up the last one as something that I want to leave us with. So he shared that the common themes which emerged were a love of Judaism, a need for Shabbat, convenience plays a role, online education is possible, small groups can flourish online, there is no place like home, speaking of course about many homes perhaps, but the congregational home, and the last one, and I'm going to say it twice if you don't mind, we all learned what it's like to be isolated. I'm going to repeat that. We all learned what it's like to be isolated. It's extremely important. I read this article at the time and it blew me away, not because I didn't figure that out personally, because we all felt that isolation. I don't care how many people you lived with, you felt isolated for different reasons. But we know many of us didn't live with anyone. And the isolation that struck me, this idea, is a very deeply Jewish idea, of course, and I could name a number of ways in which our tradition acknowledges this, mostly at the beginning of Genesis 2, where it says in verse 18, the very first mention of lo tov, it's not good. What is it not good? To be alone. And so we already know this from our tradition, but many of us perhaps didn't really truly experience what that meant like and what that meant like for a prolonged period of time. And so as I conclude my initial comments and pass it on to Rabbi Lerner, I wanted to say the following. One, many of us, I think, have a lot of work to do. And now I'll just speak personally. I can't even speak yet on behalf of the community that I'm just getting to know, though I know that the community already is very committed to managing or at least mitigating isolation of folks. And I would say that we all have so much work to do in this area because it's never ending. There are always people who are isolated. There are always people who are isolated, not just physically, of course, but isolated for a number of other emotional, social, and additional reasons. And for us to hold that in front of ourselves is something I'd like to propose is something that can guide us in the years ahead. And maybe, again, an obvious, but I don't think it is because I don't think we all truly understood what it felt like. And with this common understanding now, I believe we have a common responsibility and opportunity, because what are communities, if not places, where we don't forget about even one person in it?
Amen. So great to be up here. I just wanted to acknowledge how nice it is to sit with colleagues and have this conversation, I wanted to take a step back. It's interesting you mentioned Professor Sarna, who's saying, see where you are today, but of course he's a historian.
That's right.
So I was going to go with take a look back and look at our community for a minute. Not everyone knows the history, but the history goes back over 110 years to a small shul that started in Arlington, the Sylvia Street Shul. And that was the beginning of both of these communities. And Sylvia Street Shul, earliest part of our community, eventually becomes the Arlington, can you hear me? Eventually becomes the Arlington, Lexington, Bedford Jewish Community Center. And it's on Mass Ave, and it's growing in the 1930s and 40s post-war as the move to suburbia is happening. More and more of the community is moving further out from Chelsea and Malden and Cambridge and heading to Arlington, Lexington, and Bedford along kind of this Route 2 corridor. And the communities, as they grow, start to flourish and get larger. And in 1959, there's a decision made to hire the first rabbi of the shul, of this Arlington, Lexington, Bedford Jewish Community Center. And it's a very exciting moment. And sure enough, a rabbi's hired, a Reform rabbi, and people are very excited, except for the other half of the shul that wasn't as excited. And that's how Temple Emunah and Temple Isaiah were both born, at this lovely moment where the two communities went apart. The Temple Emunah community joined also with a group from Belmont. Bethel also was having a little moment together apart. And those two groups came together and formed Temple Emunah, and we have Temple Isaiah and Bethel in Temple Bethel Center in Belmont. Over the decades, right, all of these communities have grown and flourished and become and continue to be the wonderful shuls and communities that they are, in the same way that you just reflected, how they take care of one another, how we take care of everyone in our communities, and I think have really become models for Jewish participation, learning, singing, and pretty much what we are. For many years, we've had the Lexington Institute of Jewish Studies, which has been a collaborative adult education learning program that we've held and hosted for back and forth in Emunah and Isaiah, Wednesday evenings, all different professors coming, teaching, movies, you name it, all kinds of programs. Moved to Zoom, and it's been a little, need of a little restarting, shall we say? But that partnership has been there. And as I mentioned earlier, Selihot, every year, an actual religious program that we've had together. On top of that, many years we've had a Friday night Kabbalat Shabbat, where we've brought the two communities, even though we have different customs and different ways of approaching prayer, but trying to figure out how we're going to create a joint experience. That's been very rich and meaningful, which brings us to 2023 on the precipice of 5,784. And now we're going to look a little bit to the future. And I'll say this, if in 1959 the two communities split, I'm going to say in 2059 the two communities will be one again. And I say that both with excitement, delight, and joy, and maybe some of you would say with some trepidation and maybe some anxiety. What would that look like? What would that be? My sense is that over time, Jewish communities are thinking about how they can share resources and be more strategic in how they are in the world. If I look around the country, I see communities are thinking about how they can create one campus. There's one in Austin, Texas that they built together. There are all the different flavors of synagogue. There are the JCC, the Federation, all on one campus, all shared administrative space, all shared the way that they do food, and then everyone can come together and daven. I don't know exactly what things will look like in 2059. There's certainly some things that are different that will have to be sorted out. I don't know if Friday nights will be more of a Reform-style service. I don't know what Reform-style service will look like in that year. Shabbat morning might be more conservative, which I have no idea what that will look like. But I'm thinking that maybe along the way, we'll be thinking about more ways we can partner, more ways that we can create educational opportunities for our adult learners, for our teens, for all of our different age groups in the community. I see that that is probably what's going to happen, not just here, but in many different places, as many Jewish communities are consolidating and figuring out how to deal with the realities of Jewish life, both financial, economic, spiritual, in terms of the numbers and who's participating. And so it's both strange to think about that maybe in 1959 we became two communities, and maybe over the coming decades we will think about how to support one another even more. But I think it actually makes sense, as a lot of the liberal streams really share many different ideas of egalitarianism, of inclusivity, of different ideas about chesed and how we work to improve the world. And we're finding that we have more in common. There are areas of focusing on Hebrew and different aspects of ritual that have actually come maybe closer to one another. Even though the movements originally broke apart, in general, conservative movement broke away from reform in the late 19th century, wanting to create a slightly more traditional path. And these communities maybe went in different directions. But as the Haftorah, Isaiah says this morning in the Haftarah, right, we are going to Solu, we are going to make a new path. He's speaking 2,500 years ago about bringing all the different Jewish communities back from Babylonia, from where they were in Israel, returning to build the third temple. It's not quite exactly the same moment, but we are going to think about what the path to the future looks like. I know there are many challenges, and it can seem daunting, but I'm also very excited to see what that looks
like. Some folks are here who were with me this morning for our minyan, and know that I had a little moment right at the beginning of our service where I said, welcome to those of you who are in person, welcome to those of you who are on Zoom. And I realized that I was in that moment, I felt like I was echoing our Torah portion of Temnit Zavim. You stand here today, those of you who are men, those of you who are women, those of you who come from this background, those of you who have come from that background, those of you from this job and that job, those of you who are here and those of you who are not here, implying yet. And I see us as so in a moment that we don't know where we are, that we are in so many ways on a precipice. I think that in many ways does parallel that moment that was in this morning's Parsha of standing on the brink of crossing a river to a world that those hearing those words did not know what would be their own future. I've thought a lot over the last few years, actually going back much farther even than that, about how we are, I think, in many ways in our society in a Tower of Babel moment, that we've been building skyscrapers, we've been building information scrapers to the sky, thinking that if we just learn enough, do enough, build enough, surely we will all be able to do everything. We will all speak the same language. We will all be able to communicate. We will all be in it somehow and reach the heavens. And what has resulted is, in fact, that none of us speaks the same language, and we are using the same words to no longer be able to understand each other. The upshot, I think, I hope, is the fact that in so many ways in the last few years we've had chances to hit bottom. May there not be so much farther down to go, but I think as you mentioned, Rabbi Thomas' show about having each been isolated, everyone has known isolation, everyone has known anxiety and depression over these last few years, and our society that had reached a point of thinking that we're each supposed to build those towers alone, that we were each supposed to be in it for ourselves. People are actually learning that we do need each other, that we do need to find our ways back to each other, and that there is something that we are in it together about, and we don't know what that is. So I'll hearken to one more historical moment, which is thinking about the destruction of the Second Temple and the people, the rabbis, and those with them who were faced with a reality that they couldn't comprehend. The center of Judaism as they had known it was just gone. And they had learning, and they had each other, and they had to build something. And I think that they did not at that point know what they were building. And it took a few hundred years of telling each other, well, I learned this from my teacher who learned from his teacher who learned from her teacher and on back, and writing down those different stories and those different arguments until what emerged was Mishnah and Midrash and Talmud and Judaism as we know it today, or have known it until now. And I think we are in a similar moment of we are creating things, experimenting with being in person and on Zoom, experimenting with, as we ended up talking about some this morning, what it means to be an essential worker, like the water carriers and wood choppers in the Parsha, what it means to respect each other across lines of difference, what it means to try to communicate across differences in language and culture. And that I think the good news with that is that whatever it is that we try, whatever it is that we experiment with, it is heading towards something. We may not see the result, but I think it is tremendous permission to play and to try coming together in ways that are old and ways that are new and ways that would not be comfortable to our grandparents and will not be comfortable perhaps to our children and grandchildren, and yet whatever it is will lead to wherever I think Judaism is going next.
I think I'd like to move this up, if that's okay. Shabbat Shalom, Shana Tova. Such a deep pleasure to be able to be in this panel with all of you today. So I've been thinking about the nature of time and space, just a light topic for reflection over the course of this past while, but it's something I've been thinking about, something that I've been thinking about since 2020. Because when we had to find other spaces in which to gather, other than the space like we're in today, the nature of community shifted. I am someone who loves to sing harmony. And leading services, I could see people's mouths moving, but I didn't get to sing with anyone else. And the nature of that isolation is something that I think we still struggle with today. It's not like it's been a new shift. The fact that you can listen to a symphony while in your bathtub is actually changes the nature of what musical performance is like altogether, right? You don't have to be in a space to experience it, but what you experience is different. Because rooms, be they digital or be they concrete, brick and mortar, have energy to them. When I came back here tonight, I actually took a little time to drink in this space again, because the space has energy to it. It has the imprint of memory in it. And it has the imprint for me of the many times that we've come together to create prayer, to create music, to create ideas, to create connections. And there's a challenge that we have that's an amazing challenge and truly a challenge in how to create those spaces when we can't feel them physically. So often we use the term virtually, and I have a little bit of a problem with that because virtual means not real, right? Almost real. And when we're creating our digital spaces for prayer and community and connection, there's a challenge not only for some in the halakha of it, of how to actually follow the structures that can create Shabbat and create the holiness of space that we're in, but from a Reform perspective, what is the psycho-spiritual connection that we make in those spaces? What is the conversation that we have when we gather in those spaces? In the same way that davening is a conversation that creates a sacred cacophony, in the same way that congregational singing builds one voice together, there is a challenge that we face in how to really create that deep connection and conversation. And so I've been thinking about time and space and the difference between performance and conversation when it comes to our sacred connection. There's a tremendous opportunity that we have as we seek to balance between those different means of gathering. And we need to think about what those connections actually can be in each of those media. That connection is different in this space than it is for those who are coming in over the ether. And yet, if we go to first principles, if we go to what we believe to be important, there is the opportunity to create those deep connections in these different forms of space. Even if sometimes I find myself singing and I have to have faith that other people are singing with me by watching their mouths. So one of the questions that I ask in this is, musically, what do you need to do? Or what does one need to do to create that kind of connection when the medium can be challenging? And there are a few things that have come to mind that actually have affected the kind of music that I write since 2020. One is that the challenges of time and space behoove us to actually make access points easier. That even though there are places for participatory listening that are extremely important, that it's also very, very important to find easy ways for people to be drawn into and to engage in the music and community that's created when we sing together. And so what I write often has a lot of call and response to it, and draws us in to be able to sing with one voice, even if it's offset slightly. What does that allow us for the future? Well, again, the tremendous opportunity for growth, but also the recommitment to how we can find community when it's not necessarily as easy as it once was. And with that, if you would indulge me, I would invite us to do a teeny piece of singing together before we go to questions. Here's what I'd say. May God bless.
May God bless
All of us. With goodness. Amen. May God bless. All of us. With connection. Amen. 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 May God bless us. May God bless us. Amen. 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 God bless us. Amen. Amen. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Yasher koach. So, don't know if this works.
It does.
It does. Thank you to each of you for bringing such meaningful and thoughtful energy into this space and time, through song, through reflection, through thinking about the last few years. We're now opening it up to all of you, so get excited, for questions. I think it would be lovely if folks come right over here and have a question for any of us, anyone, about anything we said. It would be great to just take a few questions, get into conversation, and then we'll have. That's what we'll do. That's what we're doing. Who's going to be our brave first person? Love to hear your name, which community you're connected to, and so we can share. I'll actually just walk around. That's.
Scott,
Just bring it close.
Scott Burson, Temple Isaiah, rabbis and Cantor, I appreciate your insights, and I find it very easy to agree with the observation that we need more community, and Rabbi Lerner's observation that the liberal Jewish community will probably grow tighter in the future. I'm interested in whether any of you care to make a comment on the viability of the synagogue community as we know it in an environment which I perceive as everybody's delighted to participate in the services, but the services that are delivered, not merely the religious services, but the significant financial obligations for supporting those communities seems to be becoming increasingly alien to younger Jews.
Great question. Who wants to start? The next generation is looking
Okay.
for an a la carte
Yeah,
Judaism.
Yeah. Thank you, Scott. As always, very meaningful question. I'll say the following at this moment, which is I see the intersection of everything we all spoke about pointing in that direction, and therefore perhaps the response was already named, but I'll name it louder, which is one, creativity. I think creativity in our financial sustenance of synagogue life is going to be critical. And many of us love creativity as much as we love spirituality. So I think that that is something that I would lift up. The other piece is that perhaps it's why we may tighten, because it's in a way about environmentalism as much as it is about finances, not to waste. And therefore, I think if we do it because we don't want to be wasteful and we want to become tighter in our connections with one another, then I think it's very, very positive. Some might argue that it's because of finances that we would do the tightening, and I would just offer another perspective, which is that that doesn't have to be why we do it or have to even be how we do it. Others?
Sure. I'll build on that and say I can't imagine that the synagogues of 50 years from now will look like the synagogues of now or of 50 years ago. But I don't think that means necessarily the end of synagogue. I think it means the evolution. I think Judaism isn't going anywhere. It's continuing to change. And that the need to congregate continues. And so whether that is in exactly buildings that look like this, I think we're saying probably not long term. will it be the financial structures that we've had? Almost certainly not, because already those are not working in the way that they did a generation ago. But something will exist, because Beit Knesset, a house of gathering, is part of what makes us.
I will add that 50 years ago, there were no female cantors in North America.
There weren't many female rabbis either.
There was one.
There was one.
And therefore, the evolution is happening. And we need to continue to think about that and how it happens, but it's happening not only because it must, but because it should.
Great questions, great answers. I would just say one piece. When most of us looking around the room, I don't want to like stereotype on age, but when many of you and us move to a community, you automatically join the synagogue. It was just what you did as Jews. Maybe you chose one or the other, but you automatically did that. I think we have to now create a different atmosphere that is really compelling for people to choose to affiliate in whatever way they're going to. I'm a big fan of like coffee shops. I think when you come into the building, you should be greeted with a coffee shop, and then you could choose if you're going to yoga, to singing, to davening, to learning, to chesed, whatever it is, and give people a lot of options. So that's what I'm looking for. We'll send it over to Emmett.
Hi, I'm Emmett. I go to Temple Emunah, and as a member of the younger generations that y'all are talking about,
You're going to have to bring it a little closer.
is it
Definitely
not?
want to hear you, Emma.
Do I need to take my mask off?
Just if you bring it really close
Okay.
and project, you'll be
Can you
fine.
hear me now? So speaking as a member of this younger generation that y'all are talking about, I'm a member of a couple of different online Jewish communities, populated almost entirely with my generation of Jews. And I think what y'all will find as these people become more involved in your lives, hopefully, is that we are looking for synagogues. We are looking for Jewish community. We are looking for these spaces where we can pray and where we can be part of this experience. But one of the things that I know I look for, and that I know my friends in these communities look for, is who is not here. So one of the things that I'd be interested to hear the panel talk about is, how do we find the people that aren't here? You were talking about isolation. We're talking about community. Like, it's not just people who are already in our community who are isolated. It's all of my friends who are online who don't have a space to go to, whether it's because of where they live or what they look like or who they love. And I know that we try to welcome all of these people, but I think that's my question, is like, what do we do to find the people that are not in this room and make this space accessible for them in all of the ways that it needs to be accessible?
Amazing.
Good question, Emmett. I'll start us off. There are millions of Jews in America right now who are not connected to any Jewish community. And I think we are going to have to think about what kind of new structures, new doors that we need to open to bring them in. And I think it's an incredible opportunity, incredibly hard, at least in my experience. It takes a lot of work to help someone find community, but you're absolutely right. There's so many people seeking. And for us, as suburban synagogues, it's a little bit different, and I think we need to invest the resources and say we want to make sure the Jewish people writ large are looking into this community. How can we sponsor and support efforts to reach those communities wherever they are?
I'll speak to it. I don't mind. We have a lot of work to do. Truly. I think we started. Welcoming is not belonging, right? And there's a difference between those two things. And we started with the path of welcoming, but there's way more work that needs to be done. And part of that has to do with being able to hear the authentic voices of the people who are not in the room. Because I can't claim your experience. In fact, it would be wrong for me to do so, or to think that I knew necessarily. But my hope and I know it's not just mine, but I can only speak for myself, is that we make those spaces for the voices of those who are not here to be heard and to shape the conversation and to shape the needs, because that is how we make a place. And so that's going to be really important. And thank you for bringing it up. It's so deeply important.
I just want to echo everything that you said by saying that I echo everything that you say. I want to say that that was a beautiful Devar Torah. I think that there is Jewish responsibility in what you said. And of course, we could name so many different identifying folks, from Jews of color to Jews of immediate and extended families of multiple faith backgrounds. And for me, it's very important that we, whomever we is, those who are already engaged perhaps in synagogue life, do not decide what other folks who are not present need, but rather create the safe, meaningful spiritual relationships wherever that takes place. I don't necessarily think it's inside the synagogue building to begin with, though it can be, but to then make sure that it's a co-creation of a synagogue that reflects as many people and identities as possible.
We're going to take one more question, which I see from Lou. Yeah, Lou's
We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to put two things out.
just say your name and your.
Louis Stool, Temple Emunah. First of all, I haven't heard anything said yet about us being in America.
Us being in America?
In America. This idea of bowling alone, my experience when I took a severance from a company I worked for back in 1996, and they provide us outplacement services, and the first thing they said to us is, you are your own brand. Well, what happened to the community there? The other specific point I wanted to make is a lot of what I'm hearing sounds an awful like what JCCs were supposed to provide after World War II. It seems to me that was a failure, and so we need to figure out how we make that work if that is the vision. Comments?
Who wants to jump in?
Yes. And I want to say, though, not yes to the failure. I think we have been successful in a model for a long time, and that model, it's not that it wasn't successful, it's that it's no longer working the way it happened to for at the time. It's no longer the time that it was built anymore. And what JCCs were meant to be in the 1950s, we are in a radically different society. But one of the things I see in all of this is, as Americans, and I don't know about this for the rest of the world, it's certainly as Americans, we have for so long been told that we are each individuals, that we are each in it alone, that we shouldn't need help, that we should each be able to forge our own way, that each person or family is a solid unit that shouldn't need child care, that shouldn't need elder care, that shouldn't need extra support financially, that should just be able to, send their children forth to education and not need anything outside of the immediate family. And obviously that is false. And that is extraordinarily broken in our society. My hope is that as we continue to figure out what is the synagogue of just, say, this 5-year period, not to mention, the next decade and the decade after that and the decade after that, is what can we do uniquely as synagogues that answers that addresses the needs for support that we have among ourselves. And I think some of that does begin to happen naturally, as I hope, as people say, I need to be with people. I'm realizing that the isolation was too much, and perhaps the pandemic has accelerated some of that for us, but that we could find a space in which to turn to each other. But I don't think I think it's neither automatic nor obvious where to go from here.
Okay. I will close us out, which is to say, there's a lot more discussion here. Like Lou and I could have a long talk about JCCs and synagogues and what works and what didn't. But I'll say this. This is the beginning of a conversation that I hope all of us will continue to have, and that we should continue to find more places to come together. If anything about America is that America, right, doesn't have that communitarian feeling. And Judaism says the community, al tifros min hatzibur, right? Don't separate yourself from the community. And we should make our communities as open as possible, find ways to bring people in, to support them wherever they are in life. And for our communities, I think this is a magnificent moment to think about what does these next years look like. Where are the places that we can support and sustain one another despite differences? We might sing in English or in Hebrew, we might do X or Y, but where are the places that we as a community can come together? I think it's very exciting, and it's so exciting that I want to invite everyone to dinner. And I'm going to invite the choirs, the Makelav, Temple Emunah, and Temple Isaiah. Since you sing, you get to sing for your dinner first, and you're invited to go get dinner first. Everyone else is invited afterwards. At about 7:50, for those who would like Marv, the evening service, that will be in the Woke Chapel next door. And a little bit after 8, we'll come back together for our beautiful Selihot service, where the magic of everything we're talking about hopefully comes into reality. Shabbat Shalom.